Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Woke. I'm going to jump right into the presentation. So for those of you who are not presently familiar with the term woke, it is presently used to describe a philosophy and a political movement that is centered around perceived social inequalities. It was only recently added to the Mirriam-Webster dictionary in 2017. But it has its origins in the early 1900s, historically when slaves and slaves ownership were still quite prominent. It's derived from a dialect known as African-American Vernacular English and was initially referred to being alert to racial prejudice and discrimination. Since then, in the early 2010s, it's come to encompass broader perceived social inequalities such as sexism and LGBT rights. It's become entwined with the Black Lives Matter movement, which we'll get into in a bit. But instead of being just a word that signaled awareness of injustice or racial tension, it's become a call to action. Black Lives Matter is an organization that was founded in 2013, and it was founded in response to the acquittal of George Zimmerman in the death of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. According to their website, Black Lives Matter is a global organization whose mission it is to eradicate white supremacy, build local power, and to intervene in violence inflicted on Black communities. And I'm highlighting this because I am going to revert back to these points in a few slides. Trayvon Martin was a 17-year-old African-American boy from Sanford, Florida, who was shot and killed by George Zimmerman on the 26th of February 2012. Now, I've opted not to go into the details of the case. You are obviously more than welcome to do your own investigating and draw your own conclusions. But essentially, there are two sides to the story. The first being Zimmerman's, who was part of his local neighborhood watch. And he stated he acted in self-defense after Martin had followed him back to his vehicle and repeatedly smashed his head into the concrete. The second is obviously Martin's family and the media, who said that Trayvon was profiled and have cited deep-rooted societal racism as a motivation for the shooting. So as previously stated, I've opted not to go into the details of the case. It is obviously a tragedy that a 17-year-old lost his life, and there are instances where I do feel Zimmerman acted in poor judgment. But what's been more interesting to me is how the media has opted to cover this particular case. For example, Zimmerman is Hispanic. Despite this, he was referred to as a white man. An adopted picture where his skin was intentionally made to look lighter was circulated by some popular liberal media outlets. These same outlets edited phone call recordings to leave out portions of the conversation that contained evidence vindicating him. CNN, who's notorious, reported that Zimmerman referred to Trayvon by a racial slur, before subsequently retracting its statement due to improved recording that revealed what he had actually said. One important and remarkably underpublicized fact that was provided at trial was that one of the detectives, and this is quite a common thing that police do in order to get people to tell the truth, but one of the detectives, while interrogating Zimmerman the night of the incident, told him that the entire thing had been caught on surveillance. The detective was lying, obviously, but Zimmerman did not know that. His reaction to being told it was all recorded was, "Thank God." Now, how many people do you know who do something wrong, lie about it, and are then told it's on tape would react that particular way? This particular case was quite high profile, so some of you may already be familiar with it. George Floyd, who was an American man who died during an altercation with police officers in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where an arrest was made when a store clerk suspected him of using a counterfeit $20 bill. He died on May 21st, 2020, after former officer Derek Chauvin, and I say former officer because this particular gentleman was incarcerated, knelt on Floyd's neck for 9.5 minutes, as Floyd repeatedly said he couldn't breathe and eventually went limp. The killing, which was recorded on video by a bystander, sparked worldwide protests as part of a broader reckoning over racial injustice and obviously law enforcement. Again, I've opted not to go into the details of this case. There are resources available to you in the event you wish to do your own investigating. My only caution would be that if you are using a search engine such as Google, that you be aware of bias. investigating anything when it pertained to this particular subject during the presentation was actually incredibly difficult as a result of that. Nevertheless, the police officers involved in this particular case were accused of strangling or asphyxiating George Floyd, obviously with having him under the knee when he said he couldn't breathe. The preliminary findings in the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's autopsy, however, revealed no physical findings that supported that theory. George Floyd died from cardiac arrhythmia as a result of his heart disease, with drugs and carbon monoxide poisoning being contributing factors. According to a retired forensic pathologist who testified at the trial, his death should have actually been classified as undetermined. The prosecutor's complaint noted that Floyd first said he could not breathe several times before he was restrained under Officer Chaufin's knee, as video footage has actually shown. Floyd was handcuffed, standing and not voluntarily entering the police car, telling officers he was claustrophobic and unable to breathe. What interests me is the media's massive blindside to Floyd's criminal history. He previously pleaded guilty to aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon after he and 5 other men barged into a pregnant woman's apartment and Floyd shoved a pistol into her belly. For that particular offense, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. There was a substantial amount of racial tension in the States after the death of George Floyd. And obviously the Black Lives Matter movement was garnering a lot more support. One of their mantras became defunding the police, which is a slogan that supports police accountability, which is not a bad thing. But it additionally requests removing funds from police departments and reallocating them to non-policing forms of public safety and community support, such as social services and housing, etc. This movement gained traction after the shooting of Jacob Black. And the shooting of Jacob Black, who did not die but I think is paralyzed, led to riots across Kenosha, which resulted in the destruction of private property totaling $50 million. 35 small businesses were burnt down, as were hundreds of vehicles. Numerous other businesses were damaged and also looted. Now, again, what I found interesting was the media coverage of these riots. Many news outlets, such as CNN, went on to describe the riots as mostly peaceful. And if you look at this picture here, you'll see why that is laughable. Being a South African, we're quite familiar with this type of riots and this type of looting, but I don't think any of us would describe it as mostly peaceful. As we'll find later on in the presentation as well, being woke means being estranged from language. For one thing, looters and peaceful protesters aren't typically the same people. Peaceful protesters don't go around stealing and setting fires at random. The modern woke movement distances itself from rational thinking, however, and attempts to estrange us from our own language. Peaceful is just one of the many words that have been butchered by wokeism. Now, I'd like to circle back to the points I highlighted previously pertaining to the Black Lives Matter mantra. As previously stated, according to their own website, by their own admission, they are a global organization whose mission it is to build local power, one, and intervene in violence inflicted on Black communities by the state and vigilantes. Ironically, the Kenosha riots hit minority communities the hardest. Many smaller Black-owned businesses in that area were looted or damaged, were uninsured. And those that were insured had their businesses, their livelihoods, torched and stolen from, and were left with the unnecessary hardship of starting their ventures from the ground up come the morning. Celebrities including Trevor Noah, Natalie Portman, Lizzo, John Legend, and Jane Fonda spoke out about defunding the police, and some even signed an open letter pushing for a decrease in police budgets and reallocation of government funding to community programs. The open letter pointed to the death of individuals like George Floyd, along with Black communities that had been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. The letter stated that police brutality and the disease were connected and consequential to each other, noting that the American government had chosen to invest in police and military rather than in healthcare. With references to the BLM movement, Malcolm X, and the Black Panthers, who were an extremist party that became the most widely known black militant political organization of the late 1960s. Beyoncé's halftime show at the Super Bowl also saw her backup dancers wearing Black Panther-style berets, clad in black leather, posing with raised fists, evocative of the Black Power salute. To quote Beyoncé, and I won't read the whole section, but thank you for using your collective voice and letting the world know that Black Lives Matter. The killings of George Floyd, who again, as I say, is for some reason now a perpetual saint, and so many others have left us all broken. Now, in the event you defund the police, who do residents call when their homes are burglarized or have their security threatened? And in my mind, won't less cops embolden the criminals? This is, however, not really a problem for people such as Beyoncé. Her husband hired 5 former intelligence agents to protect Beyoncé after she was pulled off stage at a gig in 2013. British media reported in 2014 that during their On the Run tour, they hired 500 members of security to protect themselves and daughter Blue Ivy. They had 16 personal bodyguards protecting them around the clock. The famous pair's team consisted of a 40-man support group, with the number increasing to 61 on performance days. Crowd security was made up of 300 people and 50 were dedicated to stopping stage invasions. The increased staff and addition of two military-grade bomb-proof vehicles cost them an estimated $4 million. They also hired 24-hour security for the $88 million Hollywood mansion in 2018. So as I say, it's very easy for people like Beyoncé and Natalie Portman and Lizzo, who have a lot of money, to be able to encourage people who don't have that kind of money to defund the police, because what is it to them if there are no police and law enforcement to protect civilians? In 2021, we saw celebrities and activists get their wish, with more than 20 major cities reducing their police budgets. Activists who campaigned to take money away from the US police continued fighting to ensure that was only the start. However, in 2023, if you've been keeping up with Fox News, you'll see that with a lack of law enforcement, there has now been a surge in crime. And this has essentially put an end to the defund the police movement, with it now becoming the refund the police movement. In many cases, former advocates of the movement trying to reinvent themselves as pro-law enforcement, never actually acknowledging the devastating consequences the defunding movement had across the country. Following the murder of George Floyd in 2020, supporters donated a staggering $19 million to the Black Lives Matter movement. The non-profit ended the fiscal year with a $9 million deficit, however. Only 33% of the donations were given to charities. The executives, however, were paid millions. $1.6 million went to the father of BLM co-founder Patrice for security services, yet another defund the police advocate spending millions on their own safety. $2.1 million went to a board member for consulting. And Patrice left the Black Lives Matter leadership in 2021 after documents revealed she spent millions on luxury homes in Los Angeles and Georgia. So Black Lives Matter became by large mansions. As of 2023, the organization is now on the brink of bankruptcy. 2 of the 3 Black Lives Matter founders identified as queer. Large sums of money donated to the BLM movement went towards funding LGBT plus organizations and events. It is at this point we begin to see woke taking on a broader definition, and it no longer encompasses just racial issues. It now takes on social issues, particularly pertaining to the LGBT community. In the early 90s, lesbian, gay, and bisexual activists adopted the acronym LGB to describe their community. Now in 2023, as you'll see by my heading, the acronym has grown substantially for the sake of inclusivity. On the corner of my screen, you will see what is known as the Pride flag. It was inspired by the classic song Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz. Gilbert Baker, an artist, activist, and openly gay military veteran, created the rainbow flag to represent the LGBT community. The original Pride flag, as this is now known, was designed in 1977 and was commissioned by Harvey Milk, who was a historic figure in the LGBT community. Now, if you go onto the internet and you do some Googling like I did, allegedly there is a lot of meaning to the colors in the flag. So the pink stands for sex, The red is life, orange is healing, yellow, sunlight, green, nature, turquoise, magic and art, indigo is for serenity, and violet is the spirit of the LGBTQ people. You'll see why I find this so amusing when we get to our flag, the heterosexual flag, in a bit. The Philadelphia Pride flag saw the addition of black and brown stripes to the traditional pride flag to symbolize people of color, and came out in response to the demand for more inclusivity across the LGBTQ+ community. The flag launch in 2017 was part of the More Color, More Pride campaign. So you can see how the BLM movement and the LGBT movement are entwined. It's at this point that things get a little bit complicated, so please bear with me. I'm going to try and explain them as simply as possible. The T in LGBT stands for transgender, and that is someone whose gender identity differs from that typically associated with the sex they were, and I love this word, assigned at birth. There's this notion that doctors just sort of hand out a sex at birth, and you're able to obviously if you're unhappy with it, change it. Many experience gender dysphoria, which they may seek to alleviate through transitioning, often adopting a different name and set of pronouns in the process. The Q in LGBTQ stands for queer or questioning. And this was particularly difficult to find a definition for, so I managed to pull something off CNN's website, and they seem to be a great source for stuff like this. Once considered a demeaning slur for being gay, queer is being reclaimed by some as a self-affirming umbrella term, especially among those who consider other labels restrictive. This is the bit that I find hysterical. Some still believe it's a homophobic slur, however, so it's always best to ask or wait for the person whom you're speaking with to use it. So it's in their tag, but it might still offend them, so yeah, don't use it. The I is for intersex. People who are intersex have genitals, chromosomes, or reproductive organs that don't fit into a male-female sex binary. Their genitals might not match their reproductive organs, or they may have traits of both. The A in this ever-expanding acronym is for asexual, a term used to describe someone who does not experience sexual attraction toward individuals of any gender. Asexuality is a sexual orientation and is different from celibacy, in that celibacy is a choice to refrain from engaging in sexual behaviors and does not comment on one's sexual attractions. Not to be confused with asexual is agender, who is a person who does not identify as having any gender, because apparently in 2023 we cannot do that. So agender means you are genderless. Non-binary and genderqueer are umbrella terms for gender identities, you're going to hear that word a lot, that are not solely male or female. It's also an umbrella term for other gender identities such as gender fluid, which means you can be male the one minute and female the next, bigender or multi-gender. In case you didn't know it was possible, again, as I say, in 2023 it is completely possible. Two-spirit refers to a person who identifies as having both a masculine and feminine spirit and is used by some Native American people to describe their sexual gender and or spiritual identity. As an umbrella term, it may encompass same-sex attraction and a wide variety of gender variances. This is getting confusing, it's because it is. Pansexuality is sexual, romantic, or emotional attraction towards people of all genders, or regardless of their sex or gender identity. Pansexual people might refer to themselves as gender blind, asserting that gender and sex are not determining factors in their romantic or sexual attraction to others. Again, not to be confused with omnisexual people who recognize the gender of potential partners. So this is important because it pertains to us, heterosexual and cisgender. The straight flag, which you'll see on the right here, and you'll notice the abundance of colors, was designed to represent heterosexuality. Heterosexual meaning to be sexually or romantically attractive exclusively to people of the opposite sex. And you can tell how they feel about that, because if colors mean things, we only get black or white. A term commonly linked with heterosexual is cisgender. Now, this word has recently gained notoriety as a slur, and you'll see why in a bit. This is a term used to describe a person whose gender identity corresponds to their sex assigned at birth. So what that means is you were born a woman and you're okay with being a woman, or you're a man and you're okay with being a man. Cis normativity or cissexual assumption is the assumption that everyone is or should be cisgender. So you are someone who thinks that men should be men and women should be women. This term can further refer to a wider range of presumptions about gender assignment, such as the presumption of gender binary, so that there are only two genders, and I don't know why you would think that there's only male and female. Nevertheless, or expectations of conformity to gender roles, even when transgender identities are otherwise acknowledged. The straight ally flag. So now we have our beautiful little black and white flag, but it's got some colors now in the shape of an A. And this represents unity and support towards the LGBTQ community. Now you might be wondering, how can I be an ally? Well, according to my research on numerous LGBT sites, one way is to respect pronouns. So if you're like me and you decide to go into the internet and do some research, they're kind enough to provide you with some tables. So you get gendered pronouns, which are your usual she and he, and then you get gender neutral, which are the ones that you can see there in the little table below. Now, I used to think referring to a single person by they, them, and theirs was ridiculous, until I realized we now have neo-pronouns like ze, ze, and zers. Not making this up, this is genuine. People do want you to refer to them by this. And many in the LGBT plus community feel it should be illegal to misgender or dead name someone. Dead naming is essentially if Jane Smith has decided to become John Smith and you refer to them as a Jane Smith, again, you are dead naming them. Scarily enough, a new bill passed by the Michigan State House last month, now with the state Senate, could mean just that. It would become a felony for people to intimidate or harass someone by deliberately misgendering them and using pronouns that are not the chosen pronouns for that person. Neo-pronouns should not be confused with xeno-pronouns. Okay, this is just in case you thought it was not ridiculous enough. It does get more ridiculous. According to Urban Dictionary, xenopronouns are actually a type of hypothetical neopronouns that are not able to be understood by humans and are expressed through human language. Theoretical examples of xenopronouns include pronouns that involve concepts that humans do not have words for, pronouns whose meanings cannot be translated into any human language, pronouns that include sounds that would be impossible for humans to make if spoken. These are pronouns that people would insist on you trying to refer to them as. An exception to these rules, I'm informed by Pronoun Wiki, is meow or purr, which is meant to refer to those who are and who identify as cats. It can be written in English. However, to speak it, one would need to have the vocal system of a cat. And if you're a human, that's obviously impossible. Some people do still want you to identify them as a cat, though. Xenopronouns are generally considered exclusive to alter humans, who are people who do not identify as human, due to their impossibility to express in human language. Now, before you assume it's just America that is jumping on this bandwagon, South Africa is also welcoming woke. Woolworths recently called on its shoppers to be allies, and you'll see there's the little ally flag this last Pride Month. The retail giant stated, "We are committed to promoting spaces in which everyone is accepted, protected, respected, and celebrated, regardless of where they come from, what they look like, and who they love, or how, or whether they worship." Another recent supporter of the woke movement here in South Africa was Vodacom, stating, "We stand in solidarity with the LGBTQIA plus community." I bet you guys are so super chuffed now because you know what all those little letters mean. Or you don't, you just know what the words are. Earlier in this presentation, we read a little bit about gender dysphoria, which is essentially people that are unhappy with the gender they were assigned at birth. Gender-affirming care is designed to support and affirm an individual's gender identity when it conflicts with the gender they were assigned at birth. Gender-affirming care encompasses a range of social, psychological, behavioral, and medical interventions. Again, if you look at this on the internet, they're very helpful. And there are lots of little pamphlets and things for you to read to see if you are gender dysphoric. Here are some things you can ask yourself, some questions you can ask yourself to see if you are, in fact, someone who suffers from gender dysphoria. 1. Wish to have the sex characteristics of another gender. 2. Preferring clothes or hairstyles typical of another gender. 3. Rejecting gender norms and stereotypes. So if you're a woman who likes to open your own doors, watch out. 4. Discomfort or distress at being treated as assigned gender at birth. 5. Preferring toys typical of another gender. So watch out, boys who like to play with Barbies. And 6. Desiring pronouns not typical of assigned gender at birth. You want other pronouns. Now you know if you are gender dysphoric. Children in the West are presently at the heart of gender politics, despite the woke's claims to the contrary. A silver lining during the COVID-19 pandemic was that many teachers were alerted to the fact that school teachers were indoctrinating the young students with LGBTQ plus ideology and exposing them to sexually explicit books and discourse. Children are in attendance at events such as pride parades that often have adults exposing themselves or gesturing crudely for the sake of embracing their kinks and fetishes. And then, as you'll see on the right, I've included a picture of what is known as drag queen story times, which are apparently educational events where drag performers read books to children. The aim being to present the diversity of gender expression and identity, build acceptance, and develop creativity in personal expression. Take from that what you will. Reading from an article on St. Louis Children's Hospital website. Puberty can be confusing or difficult for a child who is transgender, genderqueer, non-binary, or questioning their gender. Puberty blockers, also called hormone blockers, help delay unwanted physical changes that don't match someone's gender identity. Delaying these changes can be an important step in a young person's transition. It can also give your child more time to explore their options before deciding whether or how they want to transition. Using puberty blockers is like hitting a pause button. By blocking the sex hormones testosterone and estrogen, puberty blockers delay changes that can affect gender expression, including breast growth, facial hair growth, periods, voice deepening, and widening hips. Isn't that lovely? So these blockers essentially suppress testosterone and estrogen, which are hormones that help to develop the reproductive system. But they also affect the bones, the brain, and other parts of the body. Despite numerous claims that the puberty blockers are temporary and their effects reversible, recent studies have proven otherwise. They can cause infertility and lead to zero sexual function. Keeping in mind, this is being used on children. Puberty blockers can also affect the brain's development and a child's ability to self-reflect, problem solve, and socialize. Bone density typically increases during puberty, determining a lifetime of bone health. Children on puberty blockers on average see bone growth flatline. This can then lead to heightened risk of debilitating fractures in adolescents who would be expected to experience this in their 50s and their 60s. Now, in the event hormone replacement therapy or puberty blockers are not enough for you, if you are a man wanting to be a woman, you can now get what is known as a vaginoplasty. As part of gender affirmation surgery, the male external genitalia are partially removed and reconfigured. The skin of the penis and scrotum are used to create a vaginal canal and labia. It sounds exciting. Risks of the surgery include, but are not limited to, vaginal stenosis, nerve injury or poor cosmetic result, vesicovaginal fistula. Don't hold me to it. I don't know if that's the correct way of saying it, but that is essentially an abnormal connection between the bladder and what they refer to as a vagina. It's just a gaping hole, but resulting in continuous urine leakage through, again, the vagina. Rectovaginal fistula, which is a connection that should not exist between the lower part of the large intestine, the rectum or anus, and the vagina. Bowel contents can leak through the fistula, allowing gas or stool to pass through. Now again, if you look on woke websites, they vehemently deny that they are after kids, But without trying very hard at all, when I was doing research for this and I typed in vaginoplasty, the first website to pop up was none other than Boston's Children's Hospital. Again, take from that what you will. Now, if you are a woman who wants to transition to a man, you can have what is known as a phalloplasty, which is a construction or reconstruction of a penis or the artificial modification of a penis by surgery. There are 3 stages to this if you are a woman who is wanting a designer penis. The first stage is creating a penis using tissue from the forearm, thigh, or latissimus dorsi. You can see in the picture on the left, this woman has had skin grafted from her thigh in order to make the pseudo-penis. The area where the tissue is taken will require a skin graft. This may occur at the time of the initial phalloplasty surgery, or it may occur 3 to 5 weeks afterward. If it occurs later, patients will have a temporary skin covering the forearm to help it heal. The second stage of this beautiful surgery includes lengthening the urethra to allow for urination out the tip of the artificial penis, creating the scrotum and removing the vagina, and other procedures depending on the patient's individualized plan. Stage 3 of surgery involves putting in place testicle implants and an erectile device to help patient achieve an erection. The third stage typically takes place 12 months after the second. Someone who has had the surgery and was kind enough to share the details with the world was Gabrielle Mack, a female journalist and activist who donned the cover of New York magazine to talk about her phalloplasty surgery. In her article, My Penis, Myself, she discusses the controversial surgery, stating, "It has happened at least once that someone did die. I was fully ready to die, by which I mean I'd spent nearly the last of my savings, most of which had been burnt navigating transitioning, on a burial plot, just in case. So lots of money and emotional trauma, so you can look like she does on the cover of that magazine right there." She went on to write about another trans person experience, stating a non-binary white person who was still in recovery from having had a week prior the worst happen, which was that after their procedure, in which all the fat and skin had been stripped from their left forearm from nearly wrist to elbow, along with major veins, nerves, and arteries, and then shaped into a tube connected in careful layers to skin and blood vessels and nerves in their pelvis, their new penis had failed. It had died on them. So all this trauma, all this money, all this for something to not work. She goes on to say, but here they were, already getting ready for their surgeons to harvest a whole other part of their body within the month, without hesitation, because those 3 days they'd had their new penis before being rushed into an 8-hour surgery that couldn't save it. The feeling of it, even just for one moment, even still bloody and painful and packed with stitches, was worth it. Continuing further down this rabbit hole, Glamour magazine. I am a trans pregnant man and I do exist. So no matter what anyone says, I am literally living proof, says Logan Brown on the cover. Logan Brown, who was interviewed and photographed shortly before giving birth to a daughter, appears on the Glamour UK cover exposing his pregnant belly in its digital June Pride issue. He says he became pregnant accidentally while going off testosterone for a time for health reasons. When he took a pregnancy test, I can't believe this, you can't make this stuff up. When he took a pregnancy test and the result was positive, he says, all my manlyhood that I've worked hard for so long just completely felt like it was erased. I had to get to the point of being confident with who I am and being a pregnant man. The madness continues. Recently, there has been a push to abandon the term pregnant woman and instead use birthing person to avoid causing offense to those like Logan Brown who might not identify as woman. Artificially induced male breastfeeding is being introduced so trans women can breastfeed. Despite a severe lack of evidence, it is safe for the infants to do so. Some clinics are looking into womb transplants in order for trans women to be able to have children of their own. Many trans men continue using hormones while pregnant so as to not hinder their transitioning process, despite not knowing how these hormones may affect the fetus. Men who identify as women are now allowed into female sports in many parts of the States. Trans women are erasing women in female sports. Women who have trained for years are now unable to place during events and are missing out on advancement opportunities within their sports as a result. Recent examples of male-born transgender athletes taking women's places and beating women include Leah Thomas, who's pictured on the left, Laurel Hubbard, Rachel McKinnon, Terry Miller, Andrea Yearwood, Hannah Mounsey, and Fallon Fox. William Thomas ranked 462 in men's swimming. It's not bad, but I mean, when he transitioned to Leah Thomas and started participating in women's swimming, he's ranked number 1. Now, many activists would cite that there is no biological advantage that trans women have over biological women, and one of those activists is Hannah Mounsey. She is an Australia trans athlete who has slammed the decision to ban trans swimmers and dispelled theories that transgender women have a biological advantage over women. Mounsey represents Australia in the women's handball, having previously represented her country in the men's handball before transitioning. And here we have a picture of Hannah with her teammates, who she very clearly does not have any physical advantage over. She's just one of the girls. Continuing the madness, male inmates in the States and violent criminals who identify as trans are now able to be housed with female prisoners in women's prisons. Numerous female inmates are being raped and falling pregnant to violent sex offenders for the sake of appeasing political correctness. Recently, a biological man made history by winning the Miss Netherlands beauty pageant. And Sam Brinton, a former Department of Energy officer in the States, was arrested for stealing women's luggage at the airport. Brinton was pictured at a gala wearing the woman's designer clothing. I'm going to end this presentation off with reading from Romans 1, verse 22 to 25. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Therefore God gave them up in their lusts of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator. It seems to me quite telling that the symbol of God's covenant between himself and all life on earth, right, the rainbow, has been appropriated by a movement that is so blatantly anti the God of the Christian faith. As the world slips further into evil, my hope is that we will, as stated in Romans 12, verse 21, not be overcome, but instead endeavor to love and pray for those blinded by the woke movement and the progressive movement. While the woke heighten their sensitivities to social injustices, my hope is that we as Christians may be more sensitive to God's justice.